Welcome. I'm Larry Seaman for Haverhill Community Television, and this is Around Town. Today, we're at the Haverhill Public Library, where we're going to be visiting Greg Laing and the special collections portion of the library. So why don't you come on in and join me now? The special collections room is located on the third floor of the Haverhill Public Library. It's a depository of photos, artifacts, and other historical articles that together help tell the story of the people and places of Haverhill through the centuries. Well, here we are at the special collections portion of the library, and we have with us Greg Laing, who's the curator of
Tell us a little bit about you, first of all, where you were born and raised, and...
I was actually born right here in Haverhill.
Oh, excellent, excellent. How about your family, a little bit about your family background, or you yourself?
Well, my family comes from Haverhill, all of my family, my fathers and mothers and grandparents. I think they've lived here for about 300 odd years.
Did you, like for instance, your schooling, your background, did you go like Haverhill High School or to
No,
I
never lived here in Haverhill. I lived in West Newbury when I was younger.
Yeah.
And so I never actually went to the Haverhill schools, but that's close enough. So
oh yeah, sure
these
is.
little suburban towns
well, our
used
story.
to use Haverhill as their center of activity. It's sort of changed in the past generation, but that's
Right.
what happens.
Now, as a youth, there must have been something that sparked your interest about Haverhill, and
Well, Haverhill's a fascinating place.
it sure is.
But I think it was my grandparents. They must have had a very strong sense of belonging or a sense of history, because they were constantly telling us stories about this old house, or this, did you know that this was an Indian trail? Or did you know who built Winnie Kinney Castle? Or did you know that your ancestors buried in that cemetery? Just on and on and on. Not in a heavy sort of way, but just as you're driving by or walking by or visiting with somebody. The other thing I think that in those days, which is what, the 1950s, people didn't watch TV all the time.
Right.
In fact, my grandparents didn't have a TV. They had rocking chairs.
And just told stories, basically,
And we went visiting on Sundays.
Right.
And who did you visit? Elderly people, usually. And what was in elderly people's houses and backyards? Interesting stuff.
So now, what are your favorite stories about people or places in Haverhill, some sites or whatever?
Well, they're just
whatever you can
too
think
many
of.
to even talk about, but I think we'll talk later about the story of Cora Chase of Haverhill.
Okay, sure.
A girl who grew up in the Highlands and ended up having a very exotic career, I suppose. Exciting career. But there's so many. The story of Tom Sanders, the leather merchant of Haverhill, who had a son who was born with a hearing defect. He was born deaf. And he hired a young teacher to teach his boy to speak. And that teacher ended up being a man called Alexander Graham Bell. And in the process of teaching the young boy, was playing around with various experiments in the attic of Tom Sanders' mother's house.
And he did all that
he
here,
sort of invented a thing called the telephone.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was through Tom Sanders, really, that telephone was invented. Bell didn't think much of it, had his other experiments and so forth that he was more interested in.
So he helped invest.
He financed it, but more than that, he encouraged him to do it.
That was
Continue
excellent.
on, yes.
Excellent story.
And of course, they built a wonderful house in Haverhill once the telephone was launched, which was not easy. So that's a big story, which most Haverhill people should be aware of.
And I noticed downstairs, of course, there's a wall of distinguished
Haverhill Hall of
citizens
Fame.
and
Haverhill people who've gone out to the world and done something of merit or note.
Right.
Most of them, I think the criterion is that we have to have a national sort of recognition, not just a local one,
right.
of all those people. And it's interesting. I mean, it's too bad that every town doesn't have something like that. It just sort of makes people more aware of their community.
Well, this is a great spot, and I'm not too sure that as many people know about it that should.
Well, we don't lack for patrons.
Well, oh, is that right? That's good. That's good. What brought you to the Haverhill Public Library, and what brought on the special collections portion of?
I used this library when I was a teenager, and the people who worked here were people who my grandparents had known, and they sort of encouraged. I don't know. I liked the Haverhill Public Library. It was a very interesting place, and I was very interested.
Who was the librarian at that time?
Oh, Mr.
Remember?
Charles Fleischner. There's a label here that says the reader's friend. Well, he put the fear of God into me. Mr. Fleischner was not the person who encouraged anybody to use that library. But Mr. Wright upstairs in the genealogy room was somebody who had a big influence on me. He was a local genealogist. And I did history projects and so forth. But I spent a lot of Saturdays in that Pecker collection back in the early 60s. I wrote my high school papers and other things. So I just got familiar with it. And Haverhill, in those days, genealogy and local history was not a big popular topic as it has become. If you sat in that room, very infrequently would there be anyone else there.
So how long did the Special Collections Library come about? Was it?
Came about slowly, but it's comprised of 3 or 4 different types of collections. The earliest one is the Fine Arts Collection that was begun in 1888 with the bequest of, what was it, $15,000 to be invested until it was 20, and then it was to be expended on expensive books profusely illustrated, which the library otherwise could not afford.
Right.
So that's kind of a nice bequest, and that was from James E. Gale, who was one of our original trustees, great book collector, lived up the street, and one of the original trustees.
Excellent, excellent.
So that's this Gale art collection here, which is probably the biggest one outside of Boston, fine arts.
What other things are a part of the Special Collections
Well, then
Library?
the Haverhill History Collection, which was sort of built piecemeal, essentially through the interests of the trustees and through some of the librarians. The second librarian who came here, who was Mr. Moulton, obviously had a great interest in historical things. And you can tell that by the papers that he wrote for the club that he belonged to. The fact that in 1906 he sends a letter to every church in Haverhill and says, we want anything that you produce, any bulletin, any historical matter. We're collecting everything about our town. So I think Mr. Moulton was the one who really began it, but certainly at that time, they used to make this joke in Haverhill that whenever anybody died, you'd call the undertaker, the minister, and then the librarian to clean out the attic. And there was Mr. Moulton getting all this wonderful stuff, and it didn't. He got everything. Had a very wide sort of taste. So we have unusual things.
Well, he's done a great job, and
Mr. Campbell,
everybody came in after him because
continued, and they all loved it. And
I've seen the photos that you have. You have quite a big selection of all different things about downtown Haverhill, about Winnie-Kinney Castle.
Right.
It's unbelievable. It's great, and I hope more people visit. While we're in here in this room, this part of it, we have some of the photos over here in these files, but who is this gentleman right here?
This is our founder. This is our hero. This is Ezekiel James Madison Hale, who was the man that caused the Haverhill Public Library to come into being. And there were some other libraries, private libraries, subscription libraries here in Haverhill prior to that, but he wanted a library that was free for the citizens of Haverhill. And he made a unique proposition with the newly established city of Haverhill that if they would raise an equivalent amount of money, he would give them $15,000 to construct a new Haverhill Public Library. And they had fairs and festivals, and they got their $15,000, and they got more than $15,000, and everybody threw money in. And it caused the old library building to be built. And then he endowed it very
And when was that again?
1873 it was begun.
So that was the one right off on Summer Street here,
corner, the library
which was
that
a
everybody
beautiful piece of
yes.
property at the time.
It was modeled after
Although this is a nice piece of property as well.
a different type of building.
Yes, right.
So this is our hero, and he's the guy that the Hale Hospital is named for, and what else? Other things around Haverhill. He was Haverhill's great philanthropist.
Great.
And this was given to us by his son in the 1890s.